You may not be that familiar with timepieces, but what JJ is, it is a manufacturer brand Swiss watch. Now, what manufacturer means is that all of the movement inside of this timepiece and all of their timepieces are handmade in-house. A lot of your big timepiece manufacturers that you're probably familiar with, Omega. Now, Omega started manufacturing their own movements recently, but Tag
alongside the Swiss. So, Clive Watch Wrangler Brian, didn't you promise Tanzio on Sorry that Tim would autograph a poster to his biggest fan? I actually did promise that you would autograph a poster for ArchieLuxury and we would send it to him.
If you have a poster of me, that's the first I've heard of it.
Yeah, so no.
Is that a thing?
So, it's going to be a thing because we're going to have a poster made of you, and you're going to need to autograph it to ArchieLuxury because I promised that we would send one out.
I can do, but do we ship internationally?
Well, we will. We will.
That's the first international gift we've ever given away. Congrats, Archie.
Good morning, Archieverse. This is not ArchieLuxury. This is Tan here, and I have the esteemed professor with me this morning. We're going to be talking some watches. Professor, good morning, good afternoon. How are you doing?
Hello, Tanzil. Hi, my man.
We
esteemed Tanzil.
Of course, our distinguished professor. Thank you. We did a live show this morning with Archie, and he was continuing to go through camper van talk. And I got a bit frustrated, Professor. I won't lie, and so I had to try to sidetrack it a bit with some watch talk. So I didn't get my fix of watch talk, and I thought, you know what, we'll hop on today, talk with the Archieverse, talk with the punters, talk some watches, whatever topics you guys want to talk about. Maybe we'll address some of the folks that are already here in the chat. We got Van Lux showing the Indian flag. Thank you, Van Lux. Der Stiefel, JJ Leco. Van Lux says, I want that Ooster poster. And Patek. Rick Buds says, let's go. All right, caught up with the chat. One more here.
Tanzil, I have a question.
Sure.
I have a question for you.
Let's get into it.
Okay, you are the Patek man. And
I'm a Patek enthusiast. I wouldn't say I'm the man, but yes.
For me, you're the man. Plus, also another esteemed panelist, you can say, CB. CB is
Yes.
a Patek fan. And also Mr. Zoso, he likes Pateks and others.
Let me just get the super checks. I think this guy's got to go.
Yes, sir.
Yep, we got Big Sal, $5. I can't hang around, but just want to say have a great stream, guys. Tan the man. Let the Lange versus Patek wars begin. Yes, Big Sal. Hopefully, Mr. Higgins will pop up into the chat or into the stream at some point where we can have a little bit of a battle. But we appreciate it, Big Sal. Thank you so much, and hopefully you'll catch the replay. All right, Professor, I interrupted you. I'll let you go.
All right, Tanzil.
Yes, sir.
What would be the one and done if you were to choose a Patek?
For me or for just the general public?
Let's start for you and then general public. I think don't take me into the 800,000 territory.
No, I won't. I'll talk about something that's aspirational, but I think within reach. For me, it's always been the Perpetual Calendar. I've always looked at the Perpetual Calendar as really the aspirational piece. And
maybe you can show. Can you show the?
Sure. We've got 162435. Jonathan Quayle Higgins, or Jonathan Higgins Quayle, as Archie likes to call him.
1316435. Okay. Hello, Jonathan.
Hey, hello to the professor, and hello, one watch guy.
We one watch. Yes. So Professor asked me a question. He said, "What would be the ideal the one and done Patek Philippe for you. So I said, for me, it's the Perpetual Calendar, and I can pull up a Perpetual Calendar for you guys if you guys like to see a Perpetual Calendar. I like the classic design of the Perpetual Calendar. Let me just grab this. Oh, I think I have it up on the screen. This is the 5327, which is the modern iteration of the traditional Perpetual Calendar, which is the lineage of the 3940, the 5140, etc. So it's basically, when you think of a Perpetual Calendar, you think of this. And I'll tell you, Professor, for me, it's always been an aspirational piece. It's always been a complication that has been a bit out of reach, but I think I could probably get there. These are going for mid 60s US, so it's not a $400,000 watch like you described.
Okay.
But to me, it really epitomizes the brand. They were the first brand to come to market with a Perpetual Calendar wristwatch. And interestingly enough about that wristwatch, just to tell you a bit of the story even on that, I think I may even have it up here. This is the first Perpetual Calendar that came to market from Patek Philippe. The movement was actually made for a ladies' watch that Patek Philippe couldn't sell. And they, about 25 years later, recased it into this case and released it and sold it to the market. I believe it was sold to an American, specifically named Thomas Emery, and it was the first Perpetual Calendar. But for me, Patek Philippe the Perpetual Calendar has always been really an important piece to the brand. So I would say for me, this is my one and done. I would probably not buy another Patek Philippe if I had one of these, because I wouldn't really need to. I think the Perpetual Chronograph is a bit out of reach, but hey, for some people it's within reach. They're hovering around the 100,000, a little bit above $100,000 mark. But for me, this is what I like. I know Higgins is going to say it's not waterproof. I told Higgins I don't need waterproof. I don't need water resistance at work, because he said, I think I talked about it not being a good daily wearer, and he said, what about in the pool? I'm like, well, I don't go in the pool every day. So, but yeah, for me, this is my one and done Patek.
But if they downgrade you and make you a pool guard, what are you gonna do?
They make me a pool guard, I won't wear a watch. I'll just take it off for the couple hours I'm working in the pool, but I would definitely still wear a Perpetual Calendar. It's the complication outside of the Perpetual Chrono, I would say, that defines the brand, and to me is one of the most beautiful pieces out there.
I understand where you're coming from, and funny enough, I was thinking about when I was selling watches, Perpetual Calendar was unthinkable for me. It was way out of my reach, and owning a Perpetual Calendar was always a dream for me, and that is why I went for a Perpetual Calendar. Keep in mind, 4 or 5 years ago, when I went for one, prices were dead cheap. I remember the 3940 were going for laughable prices. I think $25,000, and
Right.
you could really get a good one.
Yeah.
So that was those were the good times. Where those super complicated watches were unappreciated. Now I know what Professor will say. Those Perpetual Calendars. Good luck with getting those spare parts in 25 years.
Well, Patek Philippe they're willing to service any of their watches that they've ever created, even though, yes, it will be expensive. Don't get me wrong. But he asked me a question that was within reach, not a crazy minute repeater tourbillon Perpetual Calendar that's $500,000. Like this watch, you can get this on the secondary mid 60s. I think that's achievable by people if they were able to save up and really try to aspire to it. So for me, this is what I believe for myself would be a one and done. Because that was the question: what would be your one and done Patek Philippe?
Who asked you that question?
Professor asked me that question.
Professor, okay.
How about Tanzil, Jonathan, the 5320, the 5270?
So the 5320, yeah. So just I'll do a bit of flexing on Jonathan here, because we were a big Sal asked for a little bit of a
I'm
battle.
in the wrong program here.
A bit of flexing.
Why is it all the Patek talk here?
A bit of flexing. So
no, we'll do the Lange too. We'll do the Lange.
We'll do Lange. We'll let Jonathan talk in Lange. So just a bit of flexing. Patek created the first wristwatch Perpetual Calendar. They created the first retrograde Perpetual Calendar wristwatch, and because he brought up the 5320, they created the first central seconds or sweep seconds perpetual calendar in the reference 1591. And I'm going to show you guys a 1591, of which the Patek 5320 is actually it's actually based off of. So this watch was a stainless steel. It's actually a first water resistant perpetual calendar as well. It was commissioned by, and it says a Maharaja in India. I don't know if that's true.
Oh,
It
that
could,
one. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, it could just be a noble, an aristocrat or whoever.
Mm.
But that's the story. This watch was in the subcontinent. It was commissioned. It is in stainless steel, and you can see it is a central seconds. It's a central seconds perpetual calendar. Which, if I pull up the Patek Philippe 5320, you're going to now see the difference or the similarities, I would say, between them. And I'll pull it up probably off Patek's site here. So you can see here central seconds and syringe hands, Arabic numerals, but this is the modern. The question, Professor, a lot of people are asking is Patek Philippe's kind of lineup. They're doing the traditional perpetual calendar like I showed. They're doing what's called an inline perpetual calendar where it has all the the date functions just in one single line, as well as this aperture that you can see here, which is a neo vintage type of a layout. But yeah, this is also a great choice. This would be, and this is a similar price, by the way, Professor, to the 5327 in the mid 60s.
In the secondary market or in the? I
Secondary,
remember in the prime market is about 78,000 pounds,
yeah, it's about
80
100,000 US, I
US.
would say. Yeah, it's more than that
But
now.
in the secondary market is 60. You can get it.
Yeah, I can get you the retail price of this. So the retail price is 97,580 US
Yeah.
dollars. But in the secondary, you can get it for mid to high 60s, I would say. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Am I allowed to criticize this watch?
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
So I understand where the watch comes from, and that vintage piece that you just showed us is absolutely gorgeous, no doubt about that.
Yep.
I don't know what went wrong when Patek converted the vintage one to that one. I think that there is something wrong. I really can't tell what it is, but the old one is so much better. Maybe the minute hand is longer. Maybe the Arabic numerals are a little bit different, smaller, or whatever. I tried to love this particular watch. I can't. And look at the case back. Movement is clearly too small for the case. I think the case is also very big, 40 millimeters or something. 41.
It's 40.
40.
Yeah.
So the movement is clearly too small for the.
Yeah, let me explain what Patek's trying to do. So when I showed you guys the 5327, I'll pull it back up here. Patek has, or traditionally had, a buyer that was more in, and we're talking in the 90s and 2000s, where the buyers were looking for dial layouts like this, more traditional. So if you think of the 5035 annual calendar that Archie had, Roman numerals, a very traditional dial, similar to this, and moving into what we call the modern or modern era of the 2010s and up until now, the 2020s, the buyers have shifted. You're probably seeing a buyer in between the age of 25 and 55 getting into the brand, and they're seeking pieces that are a little bit more contemporary. And so this piece, a lot of these pieces, these traditional pieces, a lot of folks are thinking that Patek will eventually phase them out in favor of more contemporary pieces like the 5320 to have a more of a modern aesthetic. And if I can even try to find you guys, yeah, here is a 5236. This is another take on the perpetual calendar, by the way, is the inline perpetual calendar, which is also you got a gradient or grain blue dial, which is very modern, and an inline perpetual calendar dial layout that is trying to be more contemporary than the original one that I showed you guys, which is what I like, because maybe I'm a little older and or maybe I'm a bit of a purist that I prefer that older layout. But this is what Patek's doing today, is they're trying to make a lot of their watches. They're trying to bridge the gap, honestly, Professor, between all the people that want to buy the Aquanaut and the Nautilus, the younger buyers, as well as maintain their tradition of building circular watches, dress watches, where they can pull those buyers into a larger collection that would maybe attract them into the complications as well as the Calatrava lineup.
So
Right.
I personally did totally approve with the 5236. I call it the monobrow, by the way.
Yeah, the unibrow. That's a good. It's
Yeah.
a good thing. Like that.
But with all respect, I think one of the flaws of the previous one is the Arab numerals. I get it that Patek is trying to attract a younger crowd, but this is how a perpetual calendar looks like. It oozes quality. This is the Mercedes S class, and I find this one absolutely perfect. And
the chat is
yeah.
loving, by the way. Unibrow is hilarious and accurate. I actually never thought of that, so I do agree.
You haven't heard that? I think Swiss and I recreated that.
No, I haven't. I wasn't really a huge fan of this inline perpetual calendar. I don't like all the
They made a
apertures
vintage
together.
pocket watch with this.
This is what it's based. Exactly, this is based off of a pocket watch design, and a comment I'm going to pull up here with watching watches says the neo vintage stuff is so unimaginative, and it's because people think that way because when they see Patek and they see, I'll pull up the Calatrava lineup that I think is you're getting a bit of a mixed signal from people. Some people love it, some people hate it. This aesthetic, you never would look at this watch and think it's a Patek Philippe. From far away, it could be an Omega, it could be anything. And when people think Patek Philippe, they think of the traditional, what I showed you guys, the 5327. And when they come out with something that's a bit more contemporary, that looks like other things that are more contemporary, people are like, well, that's not the brand. And that I think is where you're getting.
No, but Tanzil, sorry, I think it's not that easy. So with this kind of dial, I approve, and I get it. What Patek is trying to do, in my opinion, although I'm not the biggest fan of this particular watch, but here I think Patek got the design right. With a perpetual calendar with a salmon dial, there's just something wrong, in my opinion. So it's not the numerals per se, or it's not the younger appearance, or it's not the fact that it doesn't look like a conventional Calatrava. I have a problem with this salmon dial, and it's not the salmon dial. It's just the layout with those numerals.
Well, because salmon's in vogue, right? And they didn't originally come out with that watch in the salmon dial. They came out with that watch in the cream dial, which is more traditional. And so Patek is historically they've released a lot of these blue dials and these really contemporary dials later in the collection than when it's initially introduced. Now they're kind of doing the opposite. If you think of the 5270 perpetual calendar, which I'll pull up here, we have it now coming out initially with a beautiful green and black dial, which is extremely modern and contemporary, that historically speaking they probably would have used a opaline dial or something more subdued. But this is what the brand is doing to try to pull people that are a bit younger, that may be only looking for, or that kind of grew up in the era of like sport watches being all the craze, into, hey, look at the rest of our lineup, because this is really our brand, and we want you to get into this as well. And that's why they're doing this. So I understand the comments around people saying, well, this is not Patek, or it's unimaginative, because they don't see it as continuing the tradition of the brand. But I think the brand is also trying to evolve into being something that is more modern, more contemporary, that is going to have or is going to be able to provide a solution to a really an opportunity out there in the market of a younger collector looking to buy into these more high horology brands.
Tanzil, in the secondary market, how much is this watch selling?
I think this watch is hovering just a little over 100, maybe 100 to 100. A fellow would know. A fellow's watching. He owns a 5270, but he owns a platinum version. Yeah, George Varhees actually owns this watch. He told me he bought this watch not too long ago.
Tanzil, when I'm watching at that chronograph movement, what do you think when is Patek issuing their first true in-house manual chronograph movement?
Jonathan, what is ever true in-house, right? What is ever not a copy of something else in life, right? Like it was interesting. I've heard people say, oh, the Calatrava case is not original. It's boring or it's not original. I'm like, or it's simple. Well, that's the whole point of it, right? Is be supposed to be simple. It's supposed to be timeless. And I'll show you. I was reading this article that I showed you earlier with all these vintage perpetual calendars, because this is what I literally do on a Saturday morning is do this. But I'm going to show you guys this piece, which is the reference 96. So this was the original Calatrava, the vintage one that the Stearns came out with in the 30s, and Patek Philippe fitted a retrograde perpetual calendar in the Calatrava case. And when I see this watch, I kind of look at it and I say, this watch actually doesn't look dated. It doesn't look like a piece that, like, oh well, Patek wouldn't be able to just release this today. You've got this minute track that is not as traditional as something that you would see on other pieces, but like, when you think of a perpetual calendar, you think a little bit more classic, like something like this in the 1527. But
did you send me that article?
No, I'll send it to you right now.
Okay.
It's a really good article. It goes through the history of the perpetual calendar, and if you're interested in this, because it was a good question the professor asked. It literally was something I was looking at this morning. So I thought, hey, why not dive into the deep end? But I don't think this watch would not be able to. I think they'd be able to sell this watch.
Oh, that watch is beautiful.
Yeah, I don't think it's dated. Maybe they changed the Arabic numerals or the Roman numerals to something else. But I think they could just modernize this and be able to sell this off the catalog.
Is that an enamel dial as well?
I don't know if it is an enamel.
I think it looks like.
Let me have a look. It didn't say anything about the dial specifically when I read the article, but you'd have to do some research on it on the reference 96. Jonathan, we're gonna have a question for you. What is a retrograde perpetual calendar? I know you like to answer these questions.
I think Lost Spring Bar is pulling our legs.
Pulling your leg.
He knows exactly what it is.
Jonathan likes to see the date jump back to 1. So.
No, but I'm a big fan of Retrograde. So for all the viewers that don't know, it's basically a display. It can be the minutes or it can be the day of the week or whatever. So retrograde means that it doesn't do a full circle, but it does a part of a circle and then jumps back at the end of that part circle, and that is called a retrograde.
That is correct. Addis says, older Patek case like 570 is what I think when I close my eyes and think of a watch. Yeah. It is timeless. It is a timeless case design that is relevant or was relevant in the early 20th century all the way into today. Maybe looking a bit different, but it still holds. I always use it like the Porsche 911. It's evolution over revolution. And the brand is just simply trying to take a recipe and make it more contemporary or modern, which again, I think is a bit polarizing right now. I think a lot of folks are just not used to it from the brand, and they're dipping the toes, but they're not going, full into the pool in terms of being interested or getting completely involved in this kind of a move from Patek Philippe. But I understand what they're doing. Like for you, Professor, industry wise, like, is this the right move for Patek, or do you think Patek should just stick to their guns and stay traditional in terms of like demand from a buyer that's out there looking for pieces that are 30,000 US and above?
Yeah, I think this collates well with the comment from Der Stiefel and our friend Swinging Kangaroo concerning the younger age, the youth who are entering into the hobby. The challenge is the following. Many of these brands have already elevated their watches to a very high price point. So entry prices have been elevated. This is number one. Number two, these brands are actually known by the youth for the steel pieces, hence the Aquanaut, Nautilus, and so forth. The challenge they have is, this is a watch-wide, industry-wide problem, is what happens with the 20-year-olds 20 to 30, and then the 15 to 25, those who are coming for the next 10 to 15 years onto the hobby and industry. And what do they produce for them? And will they want to have this desirability? And how do they attract? Because obviously, the precious metal round watches that Patek produces, Lange produces, Vacheron produces, are mostly for the older folk. It's not very appealing to the younger folk, give or take some who buy them because of collectability, quote unquote investment, and so forth. But as the recent interview with Thierry Stern indicated, he and others are trying to figure out how they're going to appeal to the younger generation that is neither too out of range from the 30, 40,000, which is still a lot of money. But the whole industry is moving towards that. Even Rolex, over the next 10 years, a Submariner will cost at retail above 20,000, and the Daytona will be, 25, 30,000 at retail again. That's how it's going to be. And eventually, the rarity will come as a result of price inelasticity. So basically, as price goes up, people are taken out of the market, and instead of having 6 watches, they'll have 2. That eventually will happen. But the question remains, and they're trying to appease to the younger generation, how do they do that? And yes, Patek is trying. Was you said the one you showed previously? I mean, obviously, the one you're showcasing now is not for the younger generation because this is not only unobtainable but extremely expensive. And even the simple Calatravas, I mean, young people, if you look at them, they're all wearing Apple watches, and they're still people with a lot of money. And the issue is, how do you transition into that and become hobbyists?
So the way I see it, Professor, is when I think of myself when I joined into the hobby, or I got into the hobby, I first looked at Rolex, and it was between 2 watches. It was a Datejust or a Submariner, and I picked up the watch. I bought a Datejust, and when I that got me, just like you're describing right now. Well, everybody's kind of looking at the Nautilus or the Aquanaut, and it gets you into the brand. From that point, if you join the hobby, if you actually get into watch collecting, you then expand into what else is out there, what else piques my interest. You do research, you look into, you go on YouTube, you find guys like Archie, you find other YouTubers out there that are attempting to describe different pieces, because we don't just talk about the Submariner or the Nautilus. So I do see that these entry point pieces, and I think that's what Patek is seeing is, well, our customers, our new customers are coming in via the Aquanaut and Nautilus line. They may not be able to get them. And so we're trying to provide another product that could appeal to them, like the 5212 weekly calendar, or this one, the 5226, or the other Calatrava that I showed on the screen earlier, that may pull them in. And these are all at price points in the $30,000 to $40,000 range. But if you really think about it too, Professor, it's not like Rolex is any cheaper. If you're trying to get in on a GMT Pepsi or a Daytona or even a Submariner, those are not to say that they're at the same price point as Pateks, but for a young individual, that is still a very, very, very pricey watch to get. And like you said, you're not going to see people with, at least not young people that are working for their money and may not come for money, having 20 pieces out of the gate, right? They might get 1 or 2, and they may stop at the 1 and 2. But I think these brands, especially Patek, is trying to say, well, our entry point is the sport watch. We may not be able to give that to our customer, and therefore we want to provide something else that would appeal to them. And that's why they're making steel pieces like the 5212, because they have those buyers out there.
So
Yeah,
Tanzil, I
but it
have
will still be unobtainable, Tanzil. And
They
the
are.
problem with Patek,
Professor, I tried to get a 5212 for like 5 months. It took me 5 months to get one, and it was just I was so frustrated. It
Yeah.
was so frustrating to get one. But you're right. It is even those are unobtainable. I agree.
Tanzil, I
Okay.
haven't read that article, but is it true that that Stern hinted that he's gonna do something in the 15 to 20,000 dollar range,
30,
similar
30 to
to the
40,
Vacheron
Yeah,
56?
maybe. So, Professor, I know you've read this
30
article. I
to
think
40.
you sent this out. So, Professor, why don't you give us a bit of a recap of this article, if you like, and then we
Yeah,
can go
yeah.
through. We can kind of chat about the contents of it.
Yeah, he's saying that they're going to be producing a new line, and the main issue is that the main reason for that is the new line going to the younger folk within this band of $30,000 to $40,000, which, admittedly, he says it's a lot of money, no doubt. But the question is, okay, if they produce it, who's going to get it? Because they're
Yeah.
even if they produce 20,000 of them,
Yeah, and
which
if they
eventually will
produce
be
20,000, they're gonna be the steel watch company that he doesn't want to become. He's on the
also,
record,
of course,
or yeah,
yeah.
he's on the record of being afraid of
Well, here's the thing.
becoming.
But you're right, Jonathan. And here's the thing: we don't even know what he's going to come up with.
Yeah.
Whether it's I don't believe it's going to be a sport lineup. I think he's going to double down into the dress lineup, and he's going to then transform his sport lineup into precious metal. Aquanaut, Nautilus.
Yeah.
That's going to be precious metal. He's going to double down into the dress lineup and use that lineup as his steel lineup. Is what I truly believe is going to happen.
I think that is true. I think he has an eye on the Vacheron 56, and
Yep.
that is where he targets.
And it's a good segue question for you, Professor. Like in the industry, and I'll pull up the Vacheron 56 while you maybe answer the question. Let's say he does something like that. Let's say he creates a entry level piece like the Vacheron 56. Is that the right move for the brand? Is it going because the Vacheron 56 in principle was a great idea. They kind of came short, in my opinion. I know Vingtinier feels otherwise in this piece, and I'm going to show on the screen where they didn't put the Geneva seal. They used a Val Fleurier movement. It was not as it's not what you really expected from Vacheron. It was more it just didn't meet the standard in our opinions, or my opinion, and I know other people's opinions. If Patek does something like this, maybe finishes it a bit better and meets the standard, is that the right play in the industry?
There is never the right play. I mean, it's a trial and error. All of them. They don't know what is the entry point. Obviously, this is an entry point, but they don't know what is
Let me
success.
rephrase the question then. If you were
Yeah.
head of sales and marketing at Patek Philippe, and you were meeting with Thierry
Oh,
Stern, and Thierry Stern says, "I'm designing a watch like this. Let's remove Vacheron Constantin from the line, from the logo, and we put Patek Philippe and design it in a similar idea that it would be a steel watch, it would be a round case, it would be marketed towards younger individuals, more contemporary, more modern. Is there a market for it, and could you be successful selling it?"
I think one of the challenges Patek has is that they're dominating their thinking with the same shaped watch, and they're stuck with leather on the one end, two leather pieces, and in the middle, a round metal case. They haven't been able to innovate on the case since the Nautilus, and the Aquanaut kind of resembles that. So they haven't shown much thinking beyond that. That's a major problem. The other challenge they have is that they're still considered to be a dress watch, like Lange. Lange doesn't profess to be a sports line. I mean, they got into it, and I don't want to steal the thunder from Jonathan. He knows it better than I, but they got into it quite late. And even when they got into it, still, one would have mixed feelings about the Odysseus. But irrespective of that, I think they need to think of a new case, not a simple three-hand watch with a leather strap. It it's just another iteration of the same thing, and they're kind of also stuck with how they appeal to the young by having. Yes, that's very nice.
Archie
I have
hates it.
more
You
than
know,
one watch. Thank you.
Archie hates it. Archie hates it though.
yeah. Well, how do they appeal, and what do they do?
Well,
It's a
look,
challenge. They need to
it's a
have a
great
new design.
Professor. It's a great
They need
answer,
to.
and I agree with you 100%. Just real quick, Jonathan, I think you may know the answer to this because I think Swiss is taking the tour. Der Stiefel, I don't remember how to pronounce it, says, will Patek allow for a factory tour if you're in town and a Patek owner? Now, I know that, so I've been to Geneva, and I know that Der Stiefel, if you go to the Patek Museum, you can go there. I haven't been on a factory tour. Jonathan, do you know if that's possible? I think Swiss may have gone on a
I
factory
think
tour, right?
I think it's going to be difficult. Museum, yes, but you better get in touch with them before you travel to make sure that it happens. But factory tour, I think I'm trying to arrange a factory tour with Lange at the moment for me, and
Yep.
they tell me it has to be arranged from a Lange boutique. There is no way to reach someone at Lange and have a factory visit being approved.
Okay, back on topic.
Yeah.
So, Professor
Yeah.
made
Let
a
me also say something.
yeah.
Even if you are in the 5 million category of watch purchases with Patek, and unless the watch has been presented to you, not by the boutique but by
By the brand,
Thierry Stern,
yeah.
you will not go to the factory. This is, a factory tour is not for people to look at watches. I mean, you can go to the main boutique in Geneva, and you can actually see in front of you the repairing that is taking place. I've been there, multiple times. I mean, at least, if I remember, more than 15 at least. So, but a factory tour is something not condoned by the industry. You cannot go to Rolex. That's you need to forget about it. Nobody goes,
So,
right?
I just wanted
Even
to
if you are the best AD. So
I would like to contradict the professor. I have a friend who didn't purchase in the 5 million category. He had fittings in Geneva, and he has been invited to a factory tour. So it's possible,
yeah,
but
but which factory, Jonathan? Not, it's not the same classification because they don't do everything in one setting, and they
yeah, yeah,
don't do the high complications in the same area.
that is true. That is true.
They're
So
different locations, so
yeah,
they could take you to the place where they assemble, for instance, and they put together the Calatrava line, but the Grand Complication, it's
yeah, I think
unless
that's gonna be
you
tough.
know, yeah,
so
yeah, yeah.
I want to
But
put
Lange, I think you will be able to go. You'll be able
I
to
want to
go
put
to Lange.
sorry guys, I want to put in the top, or just kind of go from the same kind of what the statement you made, Professor, around they need to think of another case design. And I want to bring up Swinging Kangaroo's comments, and then I'm going to put it on Jonathan. So Swinging Kangaroo says, the thing about these so-called high horology watches, we have to understand that not everyone will know and be willing to learn about these watches' history, movements, and craftsmanship, and they care only about the name on the dial, unlike us watch nerds, we do like to get into everything that goes into watchmaking. So the comment that Professor made, Jonathan, was that the circular watch on a strap is a bit stale. The brand needs to potentially look at a different type of a case design. And then I was thinking when he was talking about this, I kind of I kind of thought in my mind, what brand has been successful at this? Richard Mille maybe with a tonneau shaped case. They were successful. They've created a brand. Like when you think of a Richard Mille, that's the case shape you do think of. But outside of that, in terms of like really, really like modern contemporary era, I'm struggling to find an iconic case that you'd be able to identify that a mile away. That, like, Swing Kangaroo would say that a lot of buyers just simply care about the name on the dial, or the case says it's a Rolex or that it's a Panerai. So if they were to do this, if Professor's correct, Jonathan, is that the route to go down? Is just changing the case or creating a new case, or is the recipe still in using something that already exists but tuning it so it's just more appealing to a modern buyer?
So at the danger of pissing off some Patek Philippe fanboys here. First of all, creating a non-round case is very risky, very difficult, very hard, and only very few have achieved. Just like you said, what comes into my mind is the JLC Reverso, Cartier with a non-round case with the Santos.
But none of those are modern. Those are
Yeah,
all
no,
100 years old. I'm talking
I
about
know.
something that happened since let's say in the mid 90s till now.
I know. No.
Right.
Let me finish my point. I totally agree with you, and I was aware of that when I was saying that. Seeing from what Patek has done this year with the 5007, I'm on the record of accusing them for having done a lazy, sloppy job. And when I'm thinking of an entry level Patek Philippe in the lower price range, I could imagine they put out a 5007, maybe with an even more simple case, probably with a case without a separate bezel, with a simpler dial design, probably with a downgraded movement finish design, and that's going to be their entry line. Now the question is that a new product family, or is that still part of the Calatrava line?
Right. Yeah, it's a good point. And again, does it have to? Could a circular case just look a little? It doesn't have to go as dramatic as being a tonneau shaped case, or even I don't know if you guys remember the old TV case that they used. I think it's in the 5940. I'll try to pull it up. I don't know if that's going to be what they, unless it. I don't know. I don't know how it's going to appeal to a modern buyer because again,
Tanzil, by the way, Whole Milk says the Streamliner is
absolutely.
is
I
an
pull up his
example.
comments. Absolutely, like that is a very identifiable watch, but
Also
people
non-round.
non-round, and you have the Laurent Ferrier as well, the Sport Auto,
Yeah.
which is a very unusual type of a case as well. And these brands have definitely gone down that path of finding something a bit different than, for example, if you think of the overseas, you think the overseas, the Royal Oak, the Nautilus, very similar. Girard Perregaux Laureato, like it's when I think of those integrated bracelets and those types of designs, they're really going off of the fad that the Nautilus and the Royal Oak really drove over the last, call it 5 to 6 years. I think
Yeah.
the rising tide floats all boats in that scenario, and I don't think doubling down into another integrated model is going to be a long term success. And so
Yeah.
a lot of these brands I think are going to probably stay conservative. I mean, Professor, you know the Swiss. They're not into
Look,
taking huge
yes,
risks, right? Like they're going to stay very
you're making a
conservative.
very good point, Tanzil, and especially Patek. You need to understand a little bit the philosophy of Patek
Yep.
and also the religion of Patek and the religion of Geneva and the Canton, which is Calvinism. And this is a very Calvinistic approach to creating a watch. Lange is not a Calvinistic representation of the design. It's very Germanic, Lange, right? Patek is very specific to what it does. And what you were showing just now, the 6000 line,
Yep.
is probably the most revolutionary thing the brand will do with the yellow on the strap, with the color on the dial, with the red indices or second hand. This is very revolutionary for Patek. Patek, only recently in the history of Patek of the last 20 years, they produced a ladies' watch, right? I mean, they
Yep.
had
The
before,
24.
but they were,
Yep.
yeah. And that is something within the DNA of the brand. Look, for instance, I'll give you another example: the 5905 of Patek.
Yep.
5905. If you wear it, you look at it and you say it's beautiful, right?
Yep.
You say, "Oh my God, what a nice watch! I like the complication. It's a flyback chronograph and so forth, right?" But when you wear it, you know, that thing is like a sea dweller. I mean, they didn't get it right. Honestly, they got that one wrong. But something that Swinging Kangaroo says, which I agree completely, both for the aficionados, the experts, the people who really are into this for years and years, versus or in addition to the younger guys, the enthusiasts, the recent guys, all they care is to get a watch that has a good name, right? Which means that branding and marketing is so important. And Patek has managed to do that. It's like Rolex. If you go to Geneva, you will see, Jonathan, as you know, and Tanzil, you both have been. The boutique of Patek is on the one side of the river,
Yep.
and
I know.
on
I know
the
exactly
other,
where you're. I know exactly where you're talking about in Geneva. Yep. Continue.
right, Rue du Rhône. So
Yep.
across from Patek, on the other side,
It's
sits
Rolex.
Rolex,
Yep. Yep.
right? And they're looking at each other.
Can I tell you a
And
story, Professor? Just on this
please,
topic, when I traveled to Geneva for the first time, it was in 2015, and I had a Royal Oak 15300 on my wrist. I was so excited to go to Switzerland wearing my Royal Oak, and unfortunately, my wife and I went to Geneva, and like you said, it's all Rolex, Patek, Rolex, Patek, Rolex. It's just so when I got back to where I was living in Ireland at the time. When I got back to Ireland, I told my wife, "Yeah, I think it's time to bin the AP because I just got converted into because I went to the museum and I fell in love with the brand and the story and everything and what have you." But you're right. It's Rolex and Patek. So continue. Sorry for interrupting. I just wanted to tell you my
yeah,
binning the AP story. Just because I know. Think.
no, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. But the thing is that they're both sitting there, and they are very iconic. They're very peculiar and particular to the industry. They actually move the industry. What Rolex does is very much leading the way, but in a very um, um, I don't know how to explain it in a signaling way, but surreptitiously, but also well mannered. Patek also leads the rest of the industry because they are at the top of the pyramid along in that segment. Patek cannot be a Rolex, and Rolex will never be Patek. Yeah, they can take the Daytona to 40,000, but by the time they do that, Patek will be selling their chronograph for 250,000, right?
That's right.
I'm just fast forwarding, 20, 30 years, right? So all I'm saying is that for the ordinary person, branding, marketing is very central.
But
Everything else
Professor,
follows.
it has to be aspirational. Like Lamborghini released their
Yeah,
new V12 flagship car a few days ago, and beautiful car. It's a V12, but it's a hybrid, which is new to the brand. And then when I looked at the price, because I actually had a chance to get on the list prior to the release to purchase it, and I wanted to wait to see the car because I was like, well, it's going to be hybrid. I'm not sure because I think when the BMW M3 came out, the G80, everyone hated it. So I was like, well, I'm not gonna put a deposit and everything if I'm just to get on the list. This car is almost $1 million Canadian with taxes and options and everything, and it's aspirational. The previous Aventador, you could probably get for 600 probably if you bought it new. So it's substantially more expensive because it has to be aspirational. Just like you're saying, Rolex will have a price point that can go into 40,000, but Patek will always shoot, like, their entry level pieces are 37, 38, 40,000 US. If you want to buy it at a boutique or an AD right out the gates, what's aspirational, it's always going to be that, to be or attempt to be exclusive for the average buyer, right?
Look, we are having here a mildly intelligent.
This is bullshit, Jonathan, this comment. I sent you a picture of another watch. Professor, we have a little joke going where I got to tell you about this. I was trolling Jonathan this morning on Archie's show, where every day, to show Jonathan that I wear my Patek Philippe every single day, I send him a daily photo of the 5212. And Jonathan says, "Hey man, I think you only own one watch," as a joke. And so today, while you were talking, just to like prove him wrong, I sent him a snap of me wearing the Tudor Black Bay today, which is what the watch I'm wearing right now. But sorry,
Yeah, but
guys, I keep interrupting you guys.
Prove
And I apologize.
anything. That doesn't prove anything. Going to the Tudor boutique
And just trying
putting one on the wrist, giving me a screenshot, and leaving and say thank you doesn't mean anything.
Jonathan, what do you think? This is a pretty interesting debate. I'm interested to hear your thoughts, being obviously in the German market and being a fan of German watches, kind of seeing maybe on the opposite side compared to what Professor was talking about of the Swiss philosophy of it.
I think he's totally correct. This particularly that Geneva swamp is a self-breeding organism with a lot of incest. And it was about time that a little German company called Lange kicked their asses and let them fall from their high horses that they've been sitting on.
Good point. Good point.
Yeah, and
Excellent point.
Lange struggled for a long time. I used to call it, Professor, back in the day when I used to live stream, I used to call it a Lange in depreciation, is what I used to call it.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it was a beautiful watch, and I could always appreciate the craftsmanship that went into the piece. But as a buyer, you don't want to lose money. A lot of buyers don't want to lose money, and therefore it wouldn't be the first watch you would recommend, or even the first watch if you're a new buyer, because a lot of us know there's a lot of people who watch YouTube who are just getting into the hobby, and this is how they're getting their information. And so it would be, I think, for those kind of buyers, they just want to be a little bit more reserved in terms of spending their money. So at the time, it wouldn't have been a great choice because, hey, you go buy it at retail and then it takes a dump and it's really hard to sell, and it's a small market of buyers. It may not have been the right choice. But I think today it's completely changed. I think that, like,
Yeah, but Tanzil, that is the prime example how uneducated, how clueless, how stupid watch collectors are. I mean, the product hasn't changed over the last 25 years.
yeah.
The qualities hasn't changed. The only thing that has changed is people woke up and finally realized how beautiful those watches are.
But that's the difficulty of it, right? Like Grand Seiko has this problem, and Lange had it. I think they're past it now. Is convincing, and this is for you, Professor. I was watching a Watchbox interview with the guy who runs Arab Watch Guide for the Middle East, and they were asking him. I think Jack Forster was asking him about new brands entering into the Middle East market, and I think it might have been specifically the UAE, but I think he was just talking about the entire kind of maybe Gulf region. And the guy who runs Arab Watch Guide said, our buyers want to buy Rolex and Patek, maybe AP. These other brands are struggling because it's hard to convince our buyers to take a leap of faith. And so what the brands are doing in the Middle East is they're trying to connect. They're trying to be close. You'll see MBNF, the founders, being involved with the collectors, the brands, because I guess in that culture they want to connect with the brand on a personal level before they want to take that leap of faith. So I think, Jonathan, it's very difficult for watch brands to really break into the industry and have a huge name for them, even though there's tons of great watches that we've talked about from Gronefeld and Laurent Ferrier and other brands that are out there that just most mainstream collectors would just be like, yeah, no, it's just, I don't think I want to go down that route.
Yeah, but that changes now as well, because when you look at the independents, they're at the moment flooded with orders. I'm not sure if the watch collectors really woke up, or if just the demand is so overwhelming that some of it trickles down to the independents. But the entire perception of those exotic brands has changed in the last couple of years.
Professor, you've dealt with the Middle East market, and is that how the buyers, the consumers think, because they're really brand conscious and they're not willing to take those leaps into these independents? Because Jonathan's saying, hey, the independents are sold out. They are, but those are buyers like CB and really high end watch collectors that I think they know what they want. It's not your first time buyer that's got into the
Definitely
hobby
not.
and said, hey, I want to buy a Roger Smith, or I want to buy a Voutier, and it's really, I think, a more experienced collector. But for you, Professor, having obviously had experience in the Middle East, do you think that it's still Rolex, Patek, AP, potentially more just brand conscious versus like truly being enthusiastic about watch, horology and just getting into more independent brands?
Yeah, okay. Very, very good question. The Middle East, difficult to say. I think you said it, the Gulf countries are more affluent,
Yes.
because a country like Tunisia and Morocco have, less money. Of course, there are tourist destinations, but you can say yes and no, because like the rest of the world, there is an awakening. What happens outside of the main markets, for the mainstream brands, the issue is not so much.
Just one sec, Professor. Watch your. If you can just turn on your camera, I won't put you on the screen. Just I gotta confirm it's. You can just show your hand or something. I gotta confirm it's you before I add you. There's just someone in the back room. I just gotta make sure that they can turn on the camera and just show their hand, so it's not like a bot.
Oh well.
Yeah.
Well, my hand is here.
Not you. You can continue, but
No.
okay. Yeah, here we go. Okay, you can turn off your camera. I can add you in if you want. Yeah. All right, we got
All
Watch
right.
You Are joined. A new panelist has joined the channel. Welcome, Watch You Are. How you doing?
Okay.
No, he's there. He's there. He showed me his hand. So Watch You Are, whenever you're ready, you're in the show now.
Greetings to you. So the issue is not so much about the people, but more about the authorized dealers, the agents, and how they promote the brand. In certain markets, for instance, in Germany, as Jonathan knows, IWC is a very serious brand, and people like it. Huh?
Yep.
In the Middle East, people consider it garbage. They prefer to buy Gucci watches rather than IWC.
Yep.
And that is a fault often of the agent, of the representative. Now, Rolex has a history in these countries, especially since they, they were there since the 50s and 60s and, the first oil boom and so forth. But you do see RMs, Richard Mille, you do see them because they like them. And you do see in the Middle East special editions of the non-branded, the top 3 or 4 watch brands. You do see some weird watches appearing with special dials, one and done or two and done or a 3-piece. And these are gifted to dignitaries and state leaders and so forth. So, for the wider thing, if you go down the line, or if nobody knows it, I mean, and some of the other brands, Tudor is different, but Patek, yes, it is known, but in many parts of the Gulf, they often have a very different experience, I would say, than what you see in the US and Europe. And it's often the fault of the agent. The other problem we have, which is a 2-year-old or 3-year-old problem, is that many of the citizens of these countries are very, very affluent and they travel all the time. So very global trotters, if you know what I mean. They go everywhere. The problem they have now is that unless they go to the boutiques, they will not get any watches from authorized dealers. They cannot come to Canada and buy a Rolex. They'll tell them, "Who are you? I don't know you. Do you live here? If you don't live here, I cannot register you." So you have another complication on top of that. So, I'm digressing a little bit as usual, but the point is that we're not comparing apples to apples because it's an agency problem often.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I pulled up Gronefeld's site here for you, Jonathan. I know Jonathan was very passionate around saying watch collectors can be a little stupid when it comes to not appreciating watchmaking and the value in watches when it comes to brands like Lange and other brands that are just maybe not as appreciated. Jonathan, do you think that's just a matter of time, though? Do you think that a lot of these brands that are going to really rest on the laurels of their actual craftsmanship are going to start taking some of that market share from traditional brands like a Vacheron, a Patek, an AP, for example?
No, they won't take any market share from Patek Philippe. That is a complementary market niche that doesn't affect Patek or Vacheron at all, in my opinion. People don't decide, am I getting a Grönefeld or a Patek? They have 4 or 5 Pateks already and are getting sick and tired and now getting a Grönefeld. That is how I see it.
So this is a good comment. I know, Professor, I think you're probably well aware of this report from Morgan Stanley that the top 4 brands are like 40% of the Swiss exports. And I think that kind of is a segue from the last question around, do you see any brand really taking market share from, and it may not be today, it may be in 20 years or 15 years, or do you see the top
No.
brands retaining that oligopoly at the top of the market for the Swiss exports?
Well, if you take the top one and the 5 that follow the top one, which is Rolex,
Yep.
the one that the second, from the second to the sixth combined, they make the same revenue as Rolex,
Yep.
right? So it tells you exactly how big Rolex is and what kind of a role it plays in the industry, but also in the country in many ways.
We got Watch. We got
The
Watch.
question is,
I was gonna say Watch is back. Watch, you are welcome on the stream, and whenever you want to just jump in, feel free to jump in. It's open forum. Go ahead, Professor.
yeah,
Thanks, Sam.
yeah. Look, the next 15 years for this industry to continue the way it is, there are many what we call centrifugal and centripetal forces. Anyway, I don't want to confuse you, but they're external factors and internal factors to the industry. The external factor is, will they have competition from other countries, like Germany and so forth and others? Will there be growth? Will there be demand? And will the young folk want to buy these very expensive watches? These are kind of the external factors, which are kind of very unknown. The also unknown are internal factors, such as, are there going to be watchmakers? What is happening clearly is that the middle segment of the industry is getting obliterated by the Apple watches of the world. So anything between 300 to 2,000, 2,500 is getting completely smashed in Switzerland. So the issue is, are they going to be able to produce enough watchmakers? And to the point of Jonathan he made a few days ago, he was saying about Lange that they don't have enough watchmakers every year, even if Lange has its own school to produce these skilled craftsmen. It takes a while, it's not like, let me tell you the recipe and then you produce the watches. Watches is like sailing. You learn the trade over the years, right? The older you are in yachting, the more experienced you are, unlike other sports where you need to be younger. So watchmaking is a very tedious business that needs to be paid over time.
And just to stop you there, Professor, because we are getting paid here, I can't believe it. Ron the Shrink has donated some money, $4.99 US dollars. Tan, Jonathan, Professor, which of you thinks most highly of themselves? Please debate. So I'm going to start, Ron. I think the most highly of myself because I was able to get $5 out of you. So I think that's a pretty. I mean, there's not too many shows that can get $5 out of Ron the Shrink. So I'm gonna take that win for myself to think the most highly of myself.
But we
Does
should
anybody
debate,
disagree with
and,
me?
and
Do you
I
guys
would,
disagree? Or
I
Jonathan, do you
would,
think the most highly of
yeah,
yourself, for
I would
example?
call someone else. I think Ron the Shrink is the one who is most highly of himself.
Ooh,
I
Jonathan, I
would
think
call
you
it
fell
like
into
that.
his trap. I think you fell into his trap. He wanted you to shoot back at him. And Professor, what do you think? Do you think most highly of yourself, or do you think one of us is a bit snooty?
No, no, no. Come on.
Professor's too
Uh,
nice. I'm
Look, if
I'll go with the narcissist here.
if someone cannot follow a sophisticated discussion, maybe he comes to that
Ooh,
assumption.
see, it's exactly what he wanted. There you go, Ron. You got your $5 worth. Watch, you were graciously left out of the comment about being a narcissist. So I think I'd count yourself lucky on that one.
you know, Tanzil,
That'd be the first time though.
That'd be the first time. Hey, Professor, why don't we get Washiara to come in and discuss? So, Washiara, you've obviously been watching the show. Hop in. Like, what are your thoughts, kind of, on what we're talking about, and where you think, what do you think of the industry, and kind of where the watches should be going in terms of design and stuff?
Well, unfortunately I missed most of the show, and I just randomly by accident saw that you guys are live. But
Yep.
I think there's a couple things to consider here, right? I think you talked about independence and not much innovation in the watch industry and how hard it is for those independents to attract new consumers. And I think there's always a back and forth and sort of a trade-off in between being innovative and introducing new designs, new approaches, and at the same time, something a lot of people appreciate, iconic design, which in it by itself should stay stable over time, right? And I think a lot of people, new buyers, and also people that are in the market for a long time, they're looking exactly for those stable, iconic designs, and that's not something we just see in watchmaking, right? You see it obviously in cars. I don't know if you look at even stereo equipment, the turntables, Technics, for example, has produced a turntable for 30, 40 years, and it's very iconic. You see it all over the place. So I wouldn't write them off and bash them. I understand criticism makes sense at some point and to some extent, but I think they have a right place, obviously, and I think they will continue to benefit from that. And I don't want to shamelessly plug my shit, so to say, but Professor, we never met. Maybe if you have a minute at some point, if you want to check out, I had a bit time recently, and I put out what ended up being a 40-minute long video about the state of the secondary market, the prices, the drivers behind them, what happened and what I'll expect in the future. And I think, again, that shouldn't be the topic now, but that could be
Well,
of
Washiara,
interest
why
to
don't
him.
why don't you put the link to that in the private chat, and I'll drop it in the channel so that other people that are interested
thank
can
you,
also
thank
check
you.
you out as well. So just
Yeah.
put it in the private chat. Just type the link to your video, and I'll throw it into the main chat so everybody can see it.
Oh, okay. Well, that wasn't the idea. That I didn't want to get spreading everyone and spamming. But sure, I'll try to see if my IT skills allow me to do so, and then I'll gladly do so.
No problem. So Jonathan, you heard what you are saying, right? Classic design, evolution over revolution. I know you're a big Porsche fan. The 911 is the king of this, and that's what I see. That's what I think is the recipe for success. When people say, "Oh, the Calatrava design is boring or it's simple," well, that design works, and being able to modify that in something that can be a little bit more contemporary or modern, whether that's increasing the case size or using more popular dial colors or even dial configurations, I think is a recipe for success. Just like in the Porsche, right? You have different designs of a very normal shape, or even Lamborghinis, right, with the wedge shaped design. you can see in the history of these cars, there is that evolution, and they're still wildly popular because they're timeless. So, do you think that that's where it needs to go? Because Professor is like, hey, maybe they need to do something completely radical. And look, I don't disagree that that could also be a way to success. I just think that a lot of people have tried, and it's just I don't think the modern collector is going to have that eye to say, well, I really want to dip my foot into something without the whole market being into it, right?
So, with all respect to you, Tanzil, I think what you just said about Porsche and Lamborghini is not comparable to watches. I personally see the evolution of the 911 a little bit different. Yes, it's still the flat six. Yes, it's still the rear motor, but everything else is changed, and basically it is a brand new car in a body that still looks like a 911.
Yeah, but that's the same as a Calatrava, right? It's a 40 millimeter that's in the body, or
but
a
Patek
design that
didn't
looks similar
change
to the
their
old one.
movements within 40
No, but that's not what I'm
years.
saying. But that's not what I'm talking about design. I'm not talking about movements. I'm just talking about design. If you saw a Calatrava of the 30s, and you showed someone today who knows what a Calatrava is, they'll say it's a Calatrava. If you show them a Submariner from the 50s, they'll know it's a Submariner, right? It's just about the design. I think is really kind of where I was honing on.
And I think 10, sorry to interrupt, but if you think about, you brought Rolex up, look at the Daytona, has nothing to do with the 6263, but has, technically speaking, but has very clear design cues. And just like the 911, it got a bit bigger, a bit chubbier, and it's better in every regard, from the sapphire crystal to the solid center links throughout the bracelet, ceramic bezel, everything, right? So at least there you'll see it. Probably horlogerie, Patek might be a different story.
And I rudely interrupted Jonathan, so I'll let him finish his point. So, unless you forgot your point, Jonathan, it's my bad. I shouldn't have interrupted you on that.
Because the cat is now demanding food, so I totally forgot the point. Can you ask the question again? Maybe.
Yeah, it was just around the evolution, right? I was using the 911 as an example. How is that the recipe to success? Is evolving something that exists today to be the hit? Because this whole debate started on Patek creating a new lineup that could be successful,
but
not being a flop like the 1159 or the 56, arguably, right?
To be honest, with that new product line, I don't expect Patek to come out with anything super revolutionary. I think the professor made it very clear which nature Patek is, where they come from, what they do, how they do it. I don't expect anything spectacular.
I agree.
From them.
And let me add, if you go and read all of the interviews of Thierry Stern over the last year and a half concerning the things that he wants to see being done, he says, okay, we will discontinue the 5711, and then they produce the Tiffany 5711. They discontinue that, and they say we will produce something else. They call it 5811.
Yep.
But it's really a 5711.
Yeah, I don't think, Professor, that was more about design. I think that was more about moving away from steel. Because yes, I agree. The Tiffany was a publicity stunt. You and I have obviously talked about this in depth offline. So hey, Saad, I sent you the link, by the way, in WhatsApp if you want to join.
Please, General, join us.
What I was saying was that they moved, I think, to the 5811 because they say, look, we don't want to get typecast into steel, or we don't want to have. They have this whole marketing campaign of there is no star, meaning there is no star watch at Patek, and that's why they said we're going to move this to precious metal, so people aren't going to lust after it. And I think that it's really hard to say, right? I kind of agree with you guys. I don't think that they're going to come out with anything that's going to be a wild hit.
They will not, Tanzil. And I think that their success is they want to get out of this heavy dependence on one or two models, but they cannot. It's inescapable. You know, they're trapped in this, in their own kind of success, like Rolex, for instance. They are trapped into the oyster with the cyclops and the fluted bezel, and that's it. You know, they either revolutionize or they do the evolution. And going back to what was said previously by Rolex specialist, I'm sorry, I don't know your name yet.
Watch you are.
What is it? What? Yeah, okay. Um, the Daytona, the recent Daytona Tanzil is not evolutionary. It is very revolutionary. The case is a new case. Has nothing to do with the old case. If you look at it from the side, it is a new case. It's no longer the concave, you know, kind of shape that resembles and was traditionally resembling the oyster case of the Datejust. It is very different. So, however, they are still producing the same watch. So they're also trapped in this kind of world of the same watch over and over, the Submariner. They just change the bezel, they call it whatever, green, Mark 1, Mark 2, 54, 53. It is difficult to innovate. And I honestly believe, and allow me to say this, the biggest innovator in the industry should actually be given, they should produce a statue of his whatever figure of his presence as a statue in Geneva, which is none other than Gerald Genta, because he has literally, with 3-4 designs, saved, in my opinion, 30 to 40% of the Swiss watch industry, for sure. The second, the third, and the fourth, or you can say at least Patek in part, and Audemars for sure. Audemars far more than Patek, far more than Patek. I think Patek would have survived well, quite well, without the Nautilus. It would just produce fewer pieces and still make a lot of money. But in the case of Audemars, I think it saved the brand.
Look, so,
Because
and Professor, I don't know if
yeah.
you saw Saad's comment here, but I think he was on the same
Hmm.
wavelength as what we're talking about. Because Saad has been talking about this, so I did want to highlight it. Is the OP Celebration, which is the bubbles watch that we all talk about, and the Date 8 puzzle is a publicity stunt as well. Date 8s are a dying model, and they want to revamp it. It's interesting, Saad, because they put some bubbles on an OP, and everyone's got a hard on for it, right? Patek tries to do something funny, and everyone hates it because it's not Patek. It's just it's funny on the hypocrisy, I would say, in that, because I thought that the Patek design was actually pretty fun, using kind of a racing inspired type of a design for the Calatrava.
Right.
But you throw a bunch of bubbles on a Rolex, everyone's ready to line up with their credit cards, right? It's just interesting.
But you know, Tanzil, here you're bringing an important differentiating point. Rolex can do it because the watch is retailing for $6,000. Everybody, including, you know, a middle class, low middle class person, can borrow and line up for the watch. The watch is not going to become available even for the well-to-do, but
And
it's the price point.
I just want to respond to Fella. We ask everyone's opinion. Everyone's opinion's valid here. Professor Jonathan, myself, we all disagree all the time. I know Professor doesn't like to talk about Patek Philippe, but he knows when he hops on with me, I'm going to talk about Patek Philippe. And I know Jonathan doesn't want to talk about it when I go on his show. But the point is that I value everyone's opinion. And I think it's important because, again, the whole watch community would just all be us circle jerking each other, talking about, oh my God, I need this balloon OP, right? It's important for people to disagree. So I'm
when fella knows everything about Patek Philippe, he's welcome on the forum, and
no, he's passionate. I know, fella. He's very
and
passionate
let us
about
know
the brand.
about his visions and his knowledge, because I would like to know it as well from somebody who apparently knows it definitely.
Well, he's
But
got a strong opinion of it, right? And I know he's a Patek collector, he's a Rolex collector. He's got a lot of high end pieces as well. He definitely has an opinion. But look, the point is that like this is what makes this show good to me, and an open forum for everybody to feel comfortable around.
What is the
Well, I think
what is the point
I think
what
he's
is
just
he
saying it's a
making?
differing opinion around. He says Patek is the only in-house that sells, or the only house that sells all products across the catalog, meaning it's not a typecast, dress only type of a brand. They have sport models, they have dress models, they have all these different complications. You know, it's whatever. But the whole point I'm just trying to make is, guys, nobody on the panel should feel not capable of, or not should feel shy around saying their opinion, because everyone's opinion is valid to me.
Well, I mean, if we have one opinion, we're not advancing.
Well, that's the point, right? This was what I was saying about Saad's comment. Is everyone's kind of giving Patek flack for the Calatrava doing something that's not Patek, when Rolex goes and throws a bunch of emojis on a date, and everyone's like, "Oh my god, I love this!" Right? It's funny, but it also highlights what we were talking about around using a classic design, making it a bit more fresh, and then it becomes relevant again, because everyone just thinks of Rolex as like, oh well, champagne dial day, it's a little stuffy, it's a little old, versus throwing a bunch of emojis on it, right?
Yeah, but we're also facing another problem, which is the hype or the speculators. I think Archie said it last night with the Bubbles OP. The problem is they probably designed this Bubble OP for a younger crowd who may appreciate it, but in the end, those watches go to the heavy hitters at the ADs, who have been spending $500,000 in the last year, and probably a couple of millions within the last couple of years. So those don't end in the hands of the people that Rolex had in mind when they created those products. And I'm a little bit afraid if Patek Philippe is now doing an entry level, and if it's gonna be good, it will be the same selection process again. That only the very old client receive them as a trophy, as a reward for what they've done in the past, and that doesn't make the Patek Philippe clientele any younger.
I'm going to give the professor a chance to respond to Fella here. So I'll pull up the comments. I'll read them, Professor, and I'll let you respond. So Fella says, Gerald Genta did not save anything. 95% of the success of his pieces were due to staff, marketing, distribution, and other things. It wasn't the design per se. It's ignorant to think it was Gerald Genta. And then he continues, secondly, does Professor have any clue how many Patek collectors love their dress pieces? He thinks Patek Philippe is like AP. It's complete opposite. And I'm not going to say the comment at the end. But what do you think around his piece? His whole thing is that it wasn't Genta, it was all the marketing, it was all that piece that really got everybody hyped about these integrated pieces that are pieces that he had designed. Some of them are, right, because he didn't design, like, for example, the Laureato or the Piaget Polo or anything.
No, but he was instrumental. I mean, he was the designer of the Nautilus line, and the most sought after watch from the Patek collection is the Nautilus, undoubtedly. I think we agree with that, Tanzil.
In terms of like him saving that brand, absolutely. At the time in the 70s.
No, not saving. I'm not saying saving, but in terms of Patek, the most sought after Patek today is the Nautilus. Do we agree on that?
It is the most sought after Patek for sure.
Okay, so Gerald Genta is the designer, and this is all I'm saying. And because of the Nautilus,
it's just more around whether it's the product of it being because of the design, and I'll give you the example. I bought a Nautilus before the hype. I bought the 5711 before the hype. So this is in 2016, and it was a hyped watch, or it was a desirable watch, and we're talking at a time when the Nautilus was selling for 24,000 US. I paid 26.5 with David SW. So I paid more than retail, but I couldn't get it. I couldn't go to an AD. Every AD I reached out to was like, nope, we get one a year. You're never getting that watch. Same as today. So I went and I bought it, and it wasn't crazy money, but at the time, the Aquanaut, for example, was known as the poor man's Nautilus. People weren't interested in the Aquanaut. And the question is that, like, were people just into the Nautilus because of it being a Gerald Genta design, or was it because it was a piece that people preferred, or wanted this, or the sport watch craze was driving. Again, rising tide floats all boats. I would be surprised to even ask how many actual Nautilus owners actually really even like the design, to be totally honest with you. Because when I had
I
that
agree.
watch, when I had that
I
watch,
agree.
I found the Royal Oak a much better watch, much better looking watch. And I just bought it because, and I'll be very transparent, I just bought it because everybody else wanted it at the time. And it wasn't nowhere near the hype today, but it was more like you'd ping in Rolex forums or anywhere saying, hey, what's the Patek to buy? And everyone's like, well, Nautilus. But it wasn't like, oh, we hate dress watches. It was just like, no, that's the one if you're just trying to get in and you like sport watches. Well, it was more the sport watch craze that was driving it than it being Gerald Genta itself. That's the point I'm trying to make.
What people also
Go ahead, Jonathan.
What people also forget, in the mid-70s, that was when the Swiss watch industry came out of a terrible crisis, the quartz crisis, and those designs saved to a certain degree those big companies. So I totally agree with the professor that Gerald Genta deserves a statue in the middle of Geneva, and he was very instrumental. And keep in mind, the AP CEO chose Gerald Genta to make that crazy watch, and they invested some money into that piece. So he knew exactly what he was, or he chose the best designer back then. And I would say that the design of the Royal Oak certainly helped AP to a large degree. Now we can argue about Patek Philippe, how important the Nautilus is for Patek Philippe, but I would say the Nautilus
It was
also
a hated watch for a long time too. Like
yeah,
let's not.
but
A lot of collectors are pretty new, right? They don't know that like the Nautilus used to sit for a long time, and a lot of people did not like it. And it's
but they
not like it
still
was an
sold
instant.
it.
Sure, they
They still
sold it.
sold it. It made
Sure,
money.
sure, but it wasn't always that way.
Yeah,
You sold Patek Philippe's. You sold. I think you
yeah,
did.
I know. Yeah,
You sold the
Nautilus
39.
were difficult, admittedly, but they sold and they made some money towards Patek Philippe. We didn't sell many perpetual calendars. The only thing that sold pretty decently was the Calatrava when the new one with the
Which is the same
hobnail
thing
came
as the
out.
Rolex, right? Like Rolex sells a lot of date justs, and
Yep.
nobody loves the date just.
Yep.
I mean, maybe in recent, like last maybe year or two, where it got a little bit unavailable. Because remember, we used to call the Rolex 80s date justs RS when all the sport models were unavailable, which you could always get a date just, and we call it a date just RS because you could get date just. But the date just is like the Calatrava to Patek, and like you, and even today, Jonathan, like perpetual calendars, you could probably walk into an AD and try to get a perpetual calendar, and you probably would be able to get one. Maybe not a salmon dial platinum, something that's a bit more sought after, but they probably have something there. May not be the most ideal one, but they probably have something. And the World Time's also like that, by the way. The World Time's not as very sought after complication as much as Archie loves it, and same with the annual calendar, not really like hyped, and they're probably available enough that if you probably asked, you'd get one not too long in the future. But
Unless you ask for a cloisonné dial.
of course, I'm talking like your standard 5230 or your standard 5146 annual calendar, for example. Just the basic stuff that's not anything special. But the reality, I guess the point I'm making is, I don't think the current hype was centered around Gerald Genta. I think it was centered around sport watches themselves being very popular. And so if you're a guy who collected a lot of Rolex and you were looking to go upstream, well, you're so far apart. And this is an important point for everybody to understand, is we're talking about a point in time. So think of Patek Philippe in the 2000s to about the 2010s. All of their pieces are very traditional. I'm going to pull up the 5227 as an example. This is a Calatrava that's still in the lineup, but it was a product of the 2010s. This is what Thierry Stern was producing for Patek Philippe as what most watches that they produce look like. So if you're coming from a sport watch background, you're so far away from being interested in something like this, which is maybe for a client that's a bit older, a bit more traditional. So you're not going to gravitate to something like this, at least not out the gate. And so what do they gravitate to? The Aquanaut and the Nautilus, because those were the sport models in arguably the best brand in the world. So that is to me where I think what happened. I don't think it was because look, I mean, if that was the case, the Bulgari would be popular, the Omega Constellation would be popular, the freaking pole router would be popular, and they're not. You know, Gerald Genta had some great designs, and he had some shite designs that the market just hasn't taken, right?
If I may
I
add
think what.
something.
Please
Go
go
ahead,
ahead. Go ahead.
Sorry for interrupting you before. I think, if we're looking for a hero, it might be Genta, but it's probably the then CEO, or rather the Italian distributors who saw an opportunity for a luxury sports watch, because that didn't exist then, right? And so that's number one. And number two is, what I think is there's kind of a mispricing in the market, or it's not the long-term equilibrium. If you go to Patek now, everyone wants to have Nautilus, they want to have Aquanauts. But what is Patek actually known for? Two things, I guess. Number one, super simple, sleek dress watches like a 5196, or grand complications. And you could go into a Patek store recently, at least, not too far ago, not too long ago, and you could get those things. The only thing you couldn't get would be the sports pieces. Now, to me, this would be if you go to Rolex and you asked back then, let's say 2-3 years ago, for a Cellini, and they said, "Oh, I'm sorry, we have a 10-year wait list for the Cellini, but I got this white dial Daytona here for you." Yep. And I think what Patek is trying to do with this "There's Not a Star" campaign, and by drawing a younger audience who they call Travas, is they, I think, want to build tension and appreciation for their super classic pieces like the Calatrava. I'm still waiting for the successor of the 5196. And once that's going to drop, people are going to maybe hopefully have a bit more understanding of what it means, of its importance in the collection. And by that, they can maybe, diversify and distribute their dependence on just one model.
So, Jonathan, this may be for you. I would like to see a show hosted by Tanner. I can help moderate, where there are 4 panelists arguing the merits of a 3-hander watch. And he's picking the Patek Antarctique, the AP Royal Oak, the Patek Nautilus, and the Vacheron Overseas. This will be a true battle. Look, hey, Jonathan, we got a show coming up later this afternoon. It might be where you want to do that duking out battle, right? I'm gonna drop the link for your channel as well, by the way.
Yeah, thank you very much. No, McLovin just received a Patek Antarctique, and he wants this watch to succeed. So I'd be careful.
Sure.
Sorry, but I still disagree slightly, and we can disagree over it, and probably nobody's right or wrong. I understand that that success of a product, be it a watch or a car or whatever, has many fathers. But in the end, it is up to the designer and the product developer to develop a product that is sexy to the clients. And yes, the Italians demanded such a watch, but to have this kind of sketchbook and to execute it and put it to real life is a skill and is an art. And that is where we all should be respectful towards Gerald Genta and all the other designers. I'm also always mentioning another designer, Jörg Hüsek, who updated those 1970s designs in the 1990s. He's a hell of a designer and doesn't get enough recognition. So I think when we're talking down Gerald Genta's role, it's not really fair, and I will side with the professor here.
No, this I agree on, of course, as well. Sorry.
I do. I am
Needless
impressed.
to say,
I was going to say I am very impressed with what you are, knowing that a distributor actually was the one that asked for a steel sports watch, luxury watch, not AP itself. But good, it's good on you for knowing that. Go ahead, Professor.
Yeah, and not to mention his contribution to the Schaffhausen Ingenieur. I mean, that was his design, and then from there on, his own brand, which was then sold to Bulgari, and from there on, they produced, the Octo and so forth. I mean, a lot of these things are, fortunately or unfortunately, his own creations. We might disagree with it, but I think he's very important to ignore, right? That's all. And there are others that have contributed, as Jonathan said, and he played an instrumental role as well with Omega and Universal Genève. So it's good to recognize the pioneers and the innovators, and he's one of those. If people don't like to accept that,
No, hey,
it's
Professor,
it's
you're absolutely right.
unfortunate.
I don't think anyone's diminishing his contribution. I think you're absolutely right in terms of like a statue of him. Like,
Tanzil,
absolutely right. Yeah, go ahead.
can you pull up Swinging Kangaroos about branding and marketing? And
Yes, sir.
you know what I would say.
Go ahead.
We all
Yeah.
say branding and marketing is so important, super important. Guy, let's remember a product line called the Cellini line. Rolex is failing to successfully sell this product with the Rolex name on it. So to me, that is the prime example that branding and marketing on all this shit is important, yes, but it's not really the deciding factor. The deciding factor is the product.
Let me just
I agree,
if
Jonathan. I agree.
Rolex ever decided to do a Cellini line or a Perpetual line, it should look something like this. It should take a classic case design that is identifiably Rolex, Jubilee bracelet, and if you're looking to make a dress watch, this is a hit to me. I think this could be. It may not have been a hit back in the day because I know the Patagonia line wasn't a hit, but some things are just ahead of their time. And I think that if you may not even use this case, but you use the Sky Dweller or use something that's contemporary, and you build in what you're looking to do, whether that's triple calendar, maybe a perpetual calendar. I mean, they did an annual calendar with the Sky Dweller, and it is wildly successful because they took the recipe of, hey, we want to take complications, but we want to keep it within our DNA. That is successful. What's failing with the Cellini is it's not Rolex's DNA, and they're trying to do something different, which the buyers are just not identifying with. So something like this, in my opinion, would be successful if it was obviously a little bit more contemporary. Stars on the dial may not be appreciated by everybody, but that's what I think Rolex should do if they were trying to do that. So, Professor, if you want to send my resume over to the CEO of Rolex, you can let him know to watch my show, and I can go help him with his sales of any
Yeah.
dress watches that he's
I,
looking to do.
Tanzil, I know this is something that you have been discussing, and also another person has been mentioning this. Mr. Zoso, for long, he has been saying that Rolex should be moving into that, and
Not should,
and I
if they want to, not should. I don't think they should go into a strap dress watch. I said if they want to be successful, they have to use
Guys,
their
I
DNA.
have to go. We have here a household emergency. I have to go.
Yeah, no
Bye-bye.
problem. I was gonna end in a few minutes anyways. So, just for
okay.
Jonathan, guys, we will probably be
Thank
back
you.
in a few hours on Jonathan's channel. I've linked it. I put the link in the chat. It's youtube.com/at Swiss SWIS John JON show. So if you want to check us out to do more arguing and being in more snobbery, we're gonna be there. But go ahead, Professor. I know you can finish your comment before I end the show, so go ahead.
Arguing, yeah, well, sure. I hope one day we argue about the future of humanity and
There you
people
go.
and being modest and humble rather than just watches, which is fine as well. Look, the question is here, Tanzil. I'll revert back to you and say, if they are so successful, revenue of Rolex is, roughly a tad below 10 billion euros,
hmm
right? $10 billion roughly,
hmm
or a little bit more if you look at current FX prices. Why should they change?
They shouldn't. It's their. This is their choice, though, right? They choose
Yeah,
to make a Cellini line. They chose to discontinue the Cellini
correct.
line to
They
make the
failed,
1908. But my point is,
and they failed.
they're going about
Yeah.
exactly, but they're going about the wrong way. The Vingtinier did bring up this comment, and I'm going to address it. He says Patagonia line were failures. The brand power elevated these pieces in collectors' mindset. I agree, they were failures at the time, but I think that if you released a watch like this today with this DNA, which is showing an oyster case with a Jubilee bracelet, or using the Sky Dwellers case, something that has more
Mm.
Rolex DNA, you make obviously the dial a little bit more contemporary, they would probably have success. And I'm saying why is because they did it with the Sky Dweller. They created a complicated watch. They used their DNA, and it's one of the most sought after pieces out there from Rolex. So
You're right. But the issue is, again, do they want to go into the Patek territory, or they keep on doing the same with some evolutionary things, to use your paraphrasing your kind of thinking? Because once they start going into this, I'll use the argument of Saad. Saad already believes that they're moving into the Patek territory with the 1908, with the case back. They're beginning to start going into this, but you are asking for this watch, or you want them. Let's put it this way: you, Mr. Zozo, and others are more sophisticated people when it comes to watches, and you're requesting for them to do this, whilst they're saying, okay, we did this, we're doing the Sky Dweller, as you said correctly. Why should we do this one right now? Because we don't have to prove anything. But I think this is for the sophisticated watch collector. This is where you want them to be. But they're saying we're doing it very well. I mean, everybody wants to be like us,
for
like
me,
Rolex.
yeah, for me,
You
Professor,
see?
I don't want them to do this. I think this is the wrong move for them to do. They are very good at making sport watches, and that's their. When I think of Rolex, I think of Submariner, GMT, Daytona. I don't really think of other ones. The Datejust, sure. The Day-Date, sure. That's it. I don't think of anything else when I think of Rolex. I think of maybe 5 lines that are quite similar, in terms of design, and that's it. I don't think they need to do anything more than that. I don't think they have to go like what
Exactly.
because what
Exactly.
you're describing, Professor, is exactly what Panerai is doing. Panerai is taking the Luminar case or the Radiomir case, and they're adding complications into it. And it's like, man, like you don't need to do that because your core is the divers, the historic divers, and the design of the case shape, simple design that people love. The simple base PAMs are the ones people love. People don't give a shit about an annual calendar in a Panerai. It makes no sense. So no, I don't believe they should do this. But if the CEO of Rolex said to me, "Hey Tan, we want to make this successful. How do we do it?" I would say you have to use your DNA because your DNA is what people buy. They don't buy a dress watch on a strap from you. That's Patek's domain, right? Patek is very successful at that. And this is why it's so polarizing when people see the 6007 and say, well, I hate it because it's not Patek. Well, because in their mind, that's not what Patek does. That's what Omega does. That's what Oris does. That's what Zenith does or Hamilton does or other brands that they can identify in a number of watches I can describe to you, or people have said that of those other brands, right? So I think that, and look, I got to run
Yeah.
too, so I think we're kind of running out of time. But I did want to obviously thank everybody who joined. Jonathan Quill Higgins, we got Watch You Are, who's here, Professor, everybody in the chat, and yeah, we'll be back, like I said, on John's show in about 3 hours ish. So check that out, and we will see you guys next time.
Thank you, Tanzil. Very nice
Bye,
to see
everyone.